The sun was setting over Highway 82 in rural Mississippi, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose that reminded Kenny Rogers of the stage lights from his early days. At 73, he had learned to appreciate these quiet moments between destinations, the peaceful stretches of road where memories could unfold like old songs playing softly on the radio. His black Cadillac needed gas, and the small Shell station ahead looked like something from a different era. A single pump island sat beneath flickering fluorescent lights, and a weathered building housed what appeared to be a combination convenience store and auto repair shop. The kind of place that survived on local traffic and travelers who needed more than just fuel. They needed a reminder that hospitality still existed in small-town America. As Kenny pulled up to the pump, he heard something that made him pause with his hand on the car door handle. A voice, clear and haunting, drifted across the evening air like a prayer set to melody. Amazing grace! How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. Kenny stepped out of his car slowly, following the sound. Behind the station, near a rusted pickup truck and some old tires, a young man sat on an overturned crate with a battered acoustic guitar across his lap. A cardboard sign leaning against a nearby gas can read, "Music for tips. God bless." The singer couldn't have been more than 17, with sandy brown hair that needed cutting and clothes that had seen better days. His jeans were patched at the knees, his flannel shirt was faded from too many washings, and his boots were worn thin at the heels. But when he sang, none of that mattered. His voice had a quality that reached right into your chest and squeezed your heart. A small group had gathered, a trucker filling up his rig, an elderly couple stretching their legs, a young mother with 2 children who had stopped to listen. In the boy's guitar case, Kenny could see a handful of bills and coins, probably enough for a meal if he was careful about where he spent it. Kenny found himself drawn closer, careful not to interrupt. The boy finished "Amazing Grace" and transitioned seamlessly into a soulful rendition of "In the Sweet By and By." His fingers moved across the guitar strings with the confidence of someone who had been playing far longer than his years would suggest, and his voice carried the kind of emotional depth that couldn't be taught, only lived. The trucker dropped a $5 bill into the guitar case and tipped his cap. "That's beautiful, son. You've got a real gift." The boy looked up with eyes that seemed older than they should have been. "Thank you, sir. God bless you." As the small crowd began to disperse, Kenny remained. Something about this scene struck him as profoundly important, though he couldn't quite put his finger on why. He'd encountered hundreds of street musicians over the years, from Nashville to New York to Los Angeles. But this felt different. This felt like destiny. "That was lovely," Kenny said, stepping forward. The boy looked up, squinting slightly in the fading light. "Thank you, sir. Would you like to hear something specific? I know quite a few hymns, some country songs, a little bit of everything, really." Kenny studied the young man's face. There was something about his features that seemed familiar, though Kenny was certain they had never met. "What's your name, son?" Daniel Carter." The boy adjusted his grip on the guitar. "I'm sorry, but you look familiar. Are you someone I should know?" Kenny smiled. "I'm Kenny Rogers. And I'm someone who appreciates good music when he hears it." Daniel's eyes widened. "Kenny Rogers? The Kenny Rogers? The gambler? Lady?" He nearly dropped his guitar in excitement. "I can't believe it. I've been listening to your songs my whole life." "Well, I appreciate that, but right now I'm more interested in listening to yours. How long have you been singing here?" Daniel's excitement faded slightly, replaced by something that looked like embarrassment. "About 6 months, sir. Ever since—" He trailed off, looking down at his hands. "Well, ever since things got difficult at home." Kenny sensed there was a story behind those words, and his experience told him it wasn't a happy one. "Would you mind if I sat and listened for a while? It's been a long drive, and your music is exactly what my soul needs right now." "Of course, sir. I'd be honored." Daniel's face brightened again. "What would you like to hear?" "Surprise me," Kenny said, settling onto an old milk crate someone had left nearby. Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, as if choosing from a library of songs stored in his memory. When he began to play, Kenny felt his breath catch. The melody was "The Gambler," his own song, but Daniel had transformed it into something entirely new. His arrangement was slower, more contemplative, and his voice gave the familiar lyrics a weight and meaning that even Kenny had never quite achieved. As Daniel sang about knowing when to hold 'em and when to fold 'em, Kenny found himself thinking about all the gambles he had taken in his own life. The decision to leave his first group and go solo. The choice to record The Gambler when his record label thought it was too risky. The countless nights on the road, away from family, chasing dreams that sometimes felt as ephemeral as smoke. But sitting here, listening to this young man breathe new life into his words, Kenny realized that the biggest gamble of all might be the one he was about to take. The story behind the voice. When Daniel finished the song, Kenny applauded softly. "That was remarkable. You've given that song something I never thought it needed, a sense of hope." Daniel looked puzzled. "Hope, sir? The way you sing it, it's not just about knowing when to quit. It's about believing that sometimes if you hold on long enough, the right cards will come." A smile played at the corners of Daniel's mouth. "My grandmother used to say that life wasn't about the hand you're dealt, but about how you choose to play it." "Sounds like a wise woman. Is she the one who taught you to play guitar?" Daniel's expression grew wistful. "Yes, sir. Grandma Rose. She passed last year, but she's the one who gave me this guitar and taught me that music could heal just about anything that was broken." Kenny looked more closely at the instrument. It was clearly old, its finish worn smooth by countless hands, but it had been well cared for. "It's beautiful. How old is it?" "From 1967. Grandma bought it with her first paycheck when she moved to Memphis to try to make it as a singer. She never did make it big, but she said the guitar was never about fame. It was about having something that could never be taken away from you. And now it's yours." "The only thing she left me that my stepfather couldn't sell," Daniel said, a note of bitterness creeping into his voice. Kenny felt a familiar tightness in his chest. He'd heard variations of this story before. Talented young people whose gifts were undervalued by the very people who should have been nurturing them. "Tell me about your stepfather." Daniel hesitated, clearly weighing how much to share with this stranger, even one as famous as Kenny Rogers. "He's not a bad man, exactly, but he doesn't understand music. He thinks it's a waste of time, something that keeps me from real work. When Grandma died and left me the guitar, he wanted me to sell it to help with the bills. But you didn't. I couldn't. It would have been like selling a piece of my soul." Daniel ran his fingers along the guitar's neck. "So I left. I've been staying with friends, working odd jobs, singing here in the evenings to make ends meet." Kenny felt his heart breaking for this young man who had chosen his art over comfort, his dreams over security. "How old are you, Daniel?" 17. I'll be 18 next month." "And after that? What's your plan?" Daniel shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant, but Kenny could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "Keep singing, I guess. Maybe save up enough to get to Nashville someday. See if anyone thinks I'm good enough to make it." "You're good enough," Kenny said without hesitation. "You're more than good enough. You've got something that can't be taught, an authentic connection to the music. But talent alone isn't enough. You need guidance, opportunity, connections." "I know," Daniel said quietly. "Sometimes I think maybe my stepfather was right. Maybe I should just find a regular job, settle down, be practical." "Let me ask you something," Kenny said, leaning forward. "When you're singing, how do you feel?" Daniel considered the question seriously. "Like I'm exactly who I'm supposed to be. Like everything broken inside me gets fixed, at least for a few minutes. Like I'm not alone." Kenny nodded. "That's how you know it's real. That feeling, that's what separates the musicians from the people who just happen to play instruments." A pickup truck pulled into the station, and Kenny watched as Daniel immediately straightened, preparing to sing for the new potential audience. But something in the way the truck's engine sounded made Daniel freeze. "Oh no," he whispered, his face going pale. A man in his 50s climbed out of the truck, his expression grim. He was built like a construction worker, with calloused hands and clothes that spoke of hard physical labor. When he spotted Daniel, his jaw tightened. "Daniel Robert Carter," he called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You get over here right now." Daniel stood slowly, clutching his guitar like a shield. "Hello, Ray." "Don't you hello Ray me. Your mother's been worried sick. You've been gone 3 days without a word. I left a note. A note saying you were going to pursue your music career. Ray's voice dripped with sarcasm. Do you have any idea how selfish you're being? Your mother's working double shifts to keep food on the table, and you're out here playing songs for quarters. Kenny watched the exchange with growing concern. He could see the shame and defiance warring in Daniel's face, the way the young man's shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself smaller. It's not just quarters, Daniel said quietly. I made almost $30 tonight. $30, Ray repeated. I make that in 2 hours doing real work. Come on, we're going home. And tomorrow, you're starting at the construction site with me. It's time you learned what it means to be a man. The intervention? Kenny stood up slowly, his decision crystallizing with each word he'd heard. Excuse me. Ray turned, noticing Kenny for the first time. This is a private family matter, mister. I understand that, Kenny said calmly. But I couldn't help overhearing, and I think there's something you should know about your stepson. He's not my stepson, Ray said curtly. He's my responsibility and he's shirking it. What's your name? Kenny asked. Ray Morrison. And you are? Kenny Rogers. Ray's expression didn't change. Either he didn't recognize the name or he didn't care. Well, Mr. Rogers, I appreciate your concern, but Daniel needs to learn that music doesn't pay the bills. Actually, Kenny said, music has paid my bills quite well for the past 50 years. This time Ray's eyes narrowed. You're telling me you're some kind of professional musician? You could say that. Kenny pulled out his phone and showed Ray a photo from his last concert, Kenny on stage in front of 15,000 people. This was taken 3 months ago in Dallas. Ray stared at the photo, then looked back at Kenny with new interest. You're really him. The real Kenny Rogers. I am. And I've been sitting here for the past hour listening to Daniel sing. He has something special, Ray. Something that comes along maybe once in a generation. He's got talent, I'll give you that, Ray said, his tone softening slightly. But talent doesn't guarantee success. Most musicians end up broke and disappointed. Kenny nodded. You're absolutely right. Most do, but some don't. And the only way to find out which category Daniel belongs in is to give him a real chance. Daniel had been watching this exchange in stunned silence. Now he found his voice. Mr. Rogers, you don't have to… Kenny held up a hand. Daniel, would you mind playing one more song for your stepfather? Something that shows him what I've been hearing. Daniel looked at Ray uncertainly. Ray sighed and nodded. Go ahead, but make it quick. Your mother's expecting us. Daniel settled back onto his crate and closed his eyes. When he began to play, he chose a song that Kenny had never heard before, something that seemed to come from deep in his soul. There's a road that leads to nowhere, and a road that leads back home. Sometimes the difference between them is the courage to be alone. But I'd rather chase a sunset than surrender to the night, 'cause the only way to find your voice is to sing with all your might. The lyrics were simple but profound, and Daniel's voice carried a maturity that belied his years. When he finished, the silence stretched long enough for the weight of his words to settle. Did you write that? Kenny asked. Yes, sir. Last week when I was thinking about whether I should come home or keep trying. Kenny looked at Ray. That's not just talent. That's artistry. That's the kind of song that could touch millions of people. Ray was quiet for a long moment, studying his stepson's face. Daniel, is this really what you want? More than anything else? More than anything, Daniel said without hesitation. I know it's risky, I know it's hard, but I can't imagine doing anything else. When I sing, I feel like I'm connecting with something bigger than myself. Ray ran a hand through his hair. Your mother's going to kill me for this, but… He looked at Kenny. If you really think he's got what it takes, what would you suggest? Kenny felt his heart rate quicken. This was the moment he had been building toward, though he hadn't realized it until now. I'd suggest he come to Nashville with me. I've got connections in the music industry, people who know talent when they hear it. I could introduce him to the right producers, the right managers, give him a real shot at making it. Daniel's guitar slipped from his hands, hitting the ground with a discordant jangle. You're serious? Dead serious, But Kenny looked at both Daniel and Ray. This isn't a guarantee of anything except opportunity. The music business is brutal, and even with connections, success requires talent, hard work, and a little bit of luck. What about his education? Ray asked. He's got one more year of high school? He can finish his GED in Nashville, Kenny said. Or he can take a gap year and see how things go. Education is important, but timing in the music business is everything. Sometimes you only get one shot. Ray looked at Daniel. What do you think? Daniel was shaking. I think I'm dreaming. I think I'm going to wake up and still be sitting here alone, singing for change. Kenny smiled. You're not dreaming, son. But this is a big decision. Take a minute to think about it. Daniel looked at his guitar, then at Ray, then at Kenny. Mr. Rogers, why? Why would you do this for someone you just met? Kenny considered the question carefully. Because 50 years ago, I was a young man with a dream and no clear path forward. I had people who believed in me and gave me chances I didn't deserve. This is my way of passing that forward. He paused, watching the emotions play across Daniel's face. But also because I heard something in your voice tonight that reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. You don't just sing songs, Daniel. You tell stories. You touch hearts. That's a gift that shouldn't be wasted. The decision Ray Morrison was not a man given to impulsive decisions. He had built his life on careful planning, hard work, and practical choices. But as he stood in the parking lot of a gas station, watching his 17-year-old stepson grapple with an opportunity that could change everything, he found himself reconsidering everything he thought he knew about dreams and security. I need to call your mother, Ray said finally. She deserves to be part of this decision. Kenny nodded approvingly. Family should always be consulted on something this important. While Ray stepped aside to make the call, Kenny sat back down next to Daniel. How are you feeling? Terrified, Daniel admitted, and excited, and guilty. Guilty? For leaving them, Ray and Mom. Things have been hard since Grandma died, and I know my music dreams seem selfish when they're struggling to pay bills. Kenny placed a gentle hand on the young man's shoulder. Daniel, let me tell you something I learned the hard way. You can't live your life trying to fix other people's problems by sacrificing your gifts. That doesn't help anyone in the long run. But what if I fail? What if I go to Nashville and nothing happens? Then you'll have failed trying to do something you love, instead of succeeding at something that slowly kills your spirit. And believe me, that's not really failure at all. Daniel picked up his guitar and held it close. Grandma Rose always said that music was like a river. It had to keep flowing, or it would dry up. Your grandmother sounds like she was a wise woman. She would have loved you, Daniel said with a sad smile. She had all your albums, used to play them while she taught me to cook. What was her favorite song? Through the years, she said it reminded her of Grandpa. He died when I was little, but she said your voice helped her remember all the good times they had together. Kenny felt a familiar tightness in his throat. That's exactly why I wrote that song. To help people hold on to love, even after loss. Ray returned, his expression unreadable. I talked to Linda. She wants to talk to you herself. He handed his phone to Daniel. Daniel took the phone with trembling hands. Hi, Mom. Kenny couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but he watched Daniel's face carefully. Concern, guilt, hope, and determination flickered across his features like emotions in a kaleidoscope. I know, Mom. I know it's scary. Yes, I understand the risks. Mom, this is Kenny Rogers, the real Kenny Rogers. I know it sounds crazy. Yes, I promise I'll be careful. Mom, what if this is my only chance? I love you too. He handed the phone back to Ray, who talked quietly with his wife for several more minutes. When he hung up, he looked at Daniel with an expression Kenny couldn't quite read. Your mother says to tell you that she's proud of you no matter what you choose. But she also says that if you go to Nashville, you better call her every single day, or she'll drive down there and drag you home by your ear. Daniel laughed, the first genuine joy Kenny had seen from him all evening. So I can go? On one condition, Ray said. You give this 6 months. Really give it everything you've got. But if it doesn't work out, you come home and finish your education. Deal? Daniel looked at Kenny. What do you think? Is 6 months enough time to know if I can make it? Kenny considered the question. In 6 months, we'll know if you've got what it takes to survive in Nashville. We might not know if you're going to be a star, but we'll know if you belong in the music business. That's enough for me, Daniel said. He stood up and extended his hand to Ray. Thank you for understanding, for letting me try. Ray pulled him into a hug instead of shaking his hand. Your grandmother would be proud of you, you know that? I hope so. Kenny watched this exchange with deep satisfaction. This was why he had stopped at this gas station, why he had been drawn to Daniel's voice. Not just to discover talent, but to witness a family choosing love over fear, dreams over security. When do we leave? Daniel asked. How about we drive to Nashville tonight? Kenny suggested. I've got a guest room at my house, and tomorrow we can start making phone calls. Daniel's eyes widened. Tonight? Really? No time like the present. Besides, I've got a feeling that the longer we wait, the more time you'll have to talk yourself out of this. Ray nodded. He's right. When your mind's made up, it's better to act. Daniel quickly packed his few belongings into a battered duffel bag, handling his guitar with the reverence usually reserved for sacred objects. As they prepared to leave, Kenny pulled Ray aside. I want you to know, I don't take this responsibility lightly. I'll watch out for him like he was my own son. Ray studied Kenny's face. I believe you will. There's something about you. I can see why people trust you. Music creates bonds, Kenny said. Between the artist and the audience, between the mentor and the student. I heard something in Daniel's voice that connected with something in my heart. That's not an accident. They exchanged phone numbers, and Ray made Kenny promise to call with regular updates. As Daniel said goodbye to his stepfather, Kenny found himself thinking about all the young artists he had encountered over the years, and how few of them had families willing to support their dreams. Ready? Kenny asked as Daniel approached the car. Daniel looked back at the gas station where he had been singing just an hour ago, then at Ray, who was watching from beside his truck. I'm ready, he said, and Kenny could hear the mixture of excitement and terror in his voice. As they pulled out of the gas station parking lot, Daniel rolled down his window and called out to Ray. Tell Mom I'll call her tomorrow, Ray waved back. Make us proud, son. The road to Nashville. The highway stretched out before them like a ribbon of possibility, illuminated by Kenny's headlights and the occasional glow of passing traffic. Daniel sat in the passenger seat, his guitar carefully secured in the back, watching the landscape roll by with the wide-eyed wonder of someone embarking on the adventure of a lifetime. Are you nervous? Kenny asked as they settled into the rhythm of the road. Nervous doesn't begin to cover it, Daniel admitted. 6 hours ago, I was just a kid singing for tips. Now I'm driving to Nashville with Kenny Rogers. It doesn't feel real. Kenny smiled. I remember that feeling. The first time I went to Nashville, I was convinced I was going to be discovered overnight and become a star within a month. What happened? I learned that talent is just the entry fee. Everything else, the work, the rejection, the small victories, the long nights, that's what separates the dreamers from the professionals. Daniel was quiet for a moment, processing this information. How long did it take you to make it? Depends on how you define making it, Kenny said. I was playing music professionally for years before I had my first hit. And even then, success came in waves. Some songs connected, others didn't. Some albums sold well, others flopped. But you never gave up. There were times I wanted to. Times when giving up would have been the smart, practical choice. But I couldn't imagine doing anything else. They drove in comfortable silence for a while, the radio playing softly in the background. A classic country station was running a late-night block of vintage hits, and Kenny found himself listening to songs that had shaped his own musical education. Can I ask you something? Daniel said suddenly. Of course. When you first heard me singing, what made you stop? I mean, really? You must have heard thousands of singers over the years. Kenny considered the question carefully. Your voice reminded me of someone. Who? Me. Not the way I sound now, but the way I sounded when I was young and hungry and absolutely certain that music was the only thing that mattered. Kenny glanced at Daniel. But more than that, you reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. What do you mean? When I was your age, music wasn't about fame or money or awards. It was about connection. About taking the things I felt inside and turning them into something that other people could feel too. Somewhere along the way, after years of success, it became easy to forget that feeling. Kenny paused, remembering. But tonight, listening to you sing The Gambler, I remembered. You took my song and made it yours, but you also gave it back to me in a way I hadn't heard it in years. Daniel looked down at his hands. I never thought about it that way. That's what made it so powerful. You weren't trying to impress anyone or prove anything. You were just sharing what was in your heart. They stopped at a 24-hour diner in a small Tennessee town to stretch their legs and grab coffee. The place was nearly empty except for a tired-looking waitress and a trucker reading a paperback novel at the counter. Daniel seemed overwhelmed by the simple normalcy of it all. This is my last night as a nobody, he said as they settled into a booth. Kenny shook his head. Daniel, you need to understand something right now, before we go any further. Fame doesn't make you somebody. Music makes you somebody. The connection you make with people through your songs. That's what matters. But surely being famous changes things. Fame is a tool, Kenny explained. It can help you reach more people with your music, but it can also distract you from the music itself. I've seen talented artists get so caught up in being famous that they forgot why they wanted to be musicians in the first place. The waitress approached their table. You boys want some coffee? Please, Kenny said. And do you have any pie? Apple and cherry, made fresh this morning. 2 slices of apple, Kenny said, then looked at Daniel. You need to eat. Tomorrow's going to be a big day. As they ate their pie and drank their coffee, Kenny began to outline his plan for Daniel's introduction to Nashville. First, we're going to get you set up with a place to stay. I've got a guest house behind my main house. It's small, but it's private and comfortable. You'll have your own space to practice and write. Daniel's eyes widened. You're going to let me stay at your house? For now, until we figure out what comes next. Kenny took a sip of his coffee. Next, I'm going to introduce you to some people. Producers, songwriters, other musicians. Not all of them will be interested, but some will be. How do you know? Because I know good music when I hear it. And more importantly, I know people who know good music when they hear it. Kenny pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. Tomorrow afternoon, I'm going to call a friend of mine named Sarah Chen. She's a talent scout for one of the major labels. She's got an ear for authentic voices. And you think she'll want to hear me? I think when I tell her I found someone singing at a gas station in Mississippi who has the kind of voice that stops traffic, she'll be very interested. Daniel set down his fork, his appetite suddenly gone. What if I disappoint her? What if I freeze up? Kenny reached across the table and placed his hand over Daniel's. Then we'll find someone else to listen. Daniel, I want you to understand something. This isn't your only shot. This is your first shot. If one door closes, we knock on another one. But what if… Stop, Kenny said gently but firmly. What if the sky falls? What if the world ends tomorrow? What if pigs learn to fly? You can't live your life preparing for every possible disaster. Daniel took a deep breath. You're right. I'm sorry. I'm just scared. Being scared is normal. Being paralyzed by fear is a choice, and it's not a choice that serves your music. They finished their pie and got back on the road. As Nashville's lights began to appear on the horizon, Daniel pressed his face to the window like a child seeing the ocean for the first time. Music City, he whispered. Home, Kenny corrected. At least I hope it will be. The first morning, Kenny's house sat on a quiet street in Nashville's Belle Meade neighborhood, a modest but comfortable home that spoke of success without ostentation. The guest house Daniel would be staying in was a converted garage apartment with a small kitchenette, a comfortable bed, and most importantly, excellent acoustics for practicing music. This is incredible, Daniel said as he set his duffel bag down and looked around. I've never had my own place before. Consider it your Nashville headquarters, Kenny said. Make yourself at home. There's food in the refrigerator and the Wi-Fi password is written on that card by the phone. Daniel picked up the card and laughed. The Gambler, 1978? The year that song was released changed my life completely. And now it's changing mine. Kenny showed Daniel around the rest of the property, including the main house's music room, where Daniel would be welcome to practice on the piano or use the recording equipment. "I want you to spend the next few days getting comfortable," Kenny said. "Write some songs, practice, get used to being in Nashville. On Monday, we'll start making calls." Daniel nodded, though Kenny could see the nervous energy radiating from him. "What should I work on?" "Whatever feels right. But I'd suggest writing some new material. People in this town here cover songs all day long. They want to know what you have to say that's uniquely yours." That evening, as Kenny sat in his study catching up on correspondence, he could hear Daniel playing guitar on the guest house porch. The melodies drifted through the night air like smoke, mixing with the sounds of crickets and distant traffic to create a symphony that spoke of dreams taking their first tentative steps toward reality. The next morning, Kenny found Daniel in the music room, hunched over a yellow legal pad with his guitar across his lap. "Morning," Kenny said, pouring himself coffee from the pot Daniel had already made. "How'd you sleep?" "Not much," Daniel admitted. "I kept waking up thinking I was dreaming, but I got some work done." "What kind of work?" Daniel held up the legal pad, which was covered with crossed-out lines and scribbled notes. "I've been trying to write a song about last night, about taking chances, about the moment when everything changes." "Can I hear what you've got?" Daniel positioned his guitar and cleared his throat. The song that emerged was raw and unpolished, but it carried an emotional honesty that took Kenny's breath away. "I was singing to the darkness with a handful of dreams, when a stranger heard my music and showed me what it means to bet everything you've got, on a voice that might not last, to leave your safe tomorrow for a shot at something vast." When Daniel finished, Kenny was quiet for a long moment. "That's it," he said finally. "What's it?" "That's the song that's going to open doors for you. It's personal, it's universal, and it tells a story that everyone can relate to. The feeling of standing at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump." Daniel looked down at his notes. "You really think it's good?" "I think it's honest. And honest is the hardest thing to be in this business." Kenny spent the rest of the morning helping Daniel refine the song, suggesting small changes to the melody and helping him tighten some of the lyrics. By lunchtime, they had a finished product that felt both polished and authentic. "Now," Kenny said, "let's call Sarah." Sarah Chen answered on the second ring. "Kenny Rogers, as I live and breathe. What can I do for you?" "Sarah, I need a favor. I found someone I want you to hear." "Another someone?" "Kenny, you know I trust your judgment, but the last 3 discoveries you sent me weren't quite ready for prime time." Kenny laughed. "This one's different, Sarah. This one has it." "What kind of it are we talking about?" "The kind that made me pull over on a highway in Mississippi and spend 2 hours listening to a kid sing for tips at a gas station." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "You drove to Mississippi to listen to a street musician?" "I didn't drive there for that. But when I heard him, I couldn't leave." "Sarah, I'm telling you, this boy has something special." "What's his story?" Kenny briefly outlined Daniel's background, his family situation, and his decision to come to Nashville. "He's 17, he's hungry, and he writes songs that make you remember why you fell in love with music in the first place." "And you want me to hear him?" "I want you to sign him. But yes, first you need to hear him." Sarah sighed. "You know I can't make promises, Kenny. The business is tougher than ever. Everyone's looking for the next big thing, but nobody wants to take risks." "This isn't a risk, Sarah. This is a sure thing that looks like a risk." "All right, bring him by my office Thursday afternoon, 2 o'clock. And Kenny?" "Yeah?" "He better be as good as you say he is, or I'm never taking your calls again." Kenny grinned. "Deal." The audition. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzly. The kind of Nashville weather that seemed designed to match the nervous energy of aspiring musicians preparing for career-defining moments. Daniel had barely slept, spending most of the night pacing the guest house and running through his songs. Kenny found him sitting on the porch at 6 in the morning, guitar in hand, staring out at the rain. "Morning," Kenny said, settling into the chair beside him. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm about to throw up," Daniel said honestly. "And like I've never been more excited about anything in my life." Kenny smiled. "That's exactly how you should feel. The day you stop being nervous about opportunities like this is the day you should worry." "Did you feel this way before your first big audition?" Worse, I was so nervous I forgot the words to my own song halfway through. But you know what? The people listening didn't care about perfection. They cared about authenticity. Daniel nodded, though Kenny could see his hands shaking slightly as he adjusted his guitar strings. What if Sarah doesn't like what she hears? Then we'll find someone who does. But Daniel, I've been in this business for 50 years, and I know talent when I hear it. More importantly, I know heart when I hear it. You've got both. They spent the morning in Kenny's music room running through Daniel's setlist one final time. Kenny had helped him choose 3 songs. The original piece he'd written about taking chances, a stripped-down version of a classic hymn that showcased his vocal range, and a cover of Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain that demonstrated his ability to interpret established material. "Remember," Kenny said as they prepared to leave for Sarah's office, "you're not trying to become someone else in that room. You're trying to show them who you already are." Sarah Chen's office was located in a sleek building on Music Row, surrounded by the record labels, publishing houses, and management companies that formed the beating heart of Nashville's music industry. As they walked through the lobby, Daniel's eyes widened at the gold and platinum records covering the walls. "Every one of those represents someone's dream coming true," Kenny observed. "But more importantly, each one represents someone who was brave enough to walk into a room like this and share their music with strangers." Sarah greeted them warmly, though Kenny could see her professional skepticism beneath the friendly exterior. She was a petite woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an understated elegance that spoke of success earned through years of identifying and developing talent. "So this is the young man who's got Kenny so excited," she said, shaking Daniel's hand. "I have to say, he doesn't usually rave about people the way he's been raving about you." Daniel managed a nervous smile. "Thank you for seeing me, Ms. Chen. I know how busy you must be. Call me Sarah. And Kenny's recommendation carries a lot of weight around here. Why don't you set up over there by the piano and let's hear what you've got." Daniel positioned himself on a stool with his guitar, taking a moment to tune and adjust his positioning. Kenny could see him taking deep breaths, centering himself the way they'd practiced. "I'm going to start with an original song," Daniel said, his voice steadier than Kenny had expected. "It's about the moment when everything changes." The first notes filled the room, and Kenny watched Sarah's expression carefully. Her skeptical look began to soften as Daniel's voice took on the warm, authentic quality that had stopped Kenny in his tracks at the gas station. The song about taking chances flowed from Daniel's guitar and voice like something that had been waiting years to be released. When he reached the chorus, his voice soared with a confidence that seemed to surprise even him. Sarah leaned forward in her chair, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine interest. When Daniel finished the song, she was quiet for a moment. "That was beautiful," she said finally. "Did you write that this week?" "Yes, ma'am. It's about meeting Mr. Rogers and coming to Nashville." "And you've been playing guitar how long?" "Since I was 8. My grandmother taught me." Sarah nodded approvingly. "Let's hear the hymn." Daniel's rendition of How Great Thou Art transformed the corporate office into something resembling a small country church. His voice carried the weight of genuine faith and personal experience, turning a familiar song into something deeply personal and moving. When he finished, Sarah looked at Kenny with raised eyebrows. Kenny simply smiled and nodded as if to say, "I told you so." "One more," Sarah said. "The Willie Nelson song." Daniel's interpretation of Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain was perhaps his strongest performance yet. He managed to honor the original while making it completely his own, his young voice bringing a fresh perspective to the classic lyrics about love and loss. When the last note faded, the office fell silent. Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at Music Row while she processed what she'd heard. "Daniel," she said finally, turning back to face him. "How old did you say you were?" 17, 18 next month." "And you've never performed professionally?" "Just at the gas station, ma'am. And in church sometimes." Sarah looked at Kenny. "You weren't exaggerating." "I never do when it comes to music." She walked back to her desk and pulled out a business card. "Daniel, I'm going to be honest with you. In this business, I hear hundreds of singers every year. Most of them are technically proficient, many of them are quite good, but very few of them have what I just heard from you." Daniel's hands were shaking as he accepted the card. "What did you hear?" "Authenticity, heart. The ability to take a song and make it yours without losing what made it special in the first place." Sarah sat back down. Those are qualities that can't be taught. Does that mean? It means I want to set up a formal showcase for you next week. I'll invite some other industry people, producers, A&R representatives, maybe a manager or two. If that goes well, we'll talk about next steps. Daniel looked like he might faint. A showcase? For me? For you. But I need you to understand something. This business is brutal, even for people with genuine talent. There are no guarantees, and success requires more than just a good voice. Kenny stepped forward. Sarah, what would you recommend Daniel focus on between now and the showcase? Keep writing. What I heard today was good, but I want to see more original material. Show us who you are as an artist, not just as a singer. She looked directly at Daniel. And stay humble. Talent can take you far, but humility and work ethic will determine how long you last. As they prepared to leave, Sarah pulled Kenny aside. You were right about him. But Kenny, he's so young. Are you prepared to help him navigate all this? I wouldn't have brought him here if I wasn't, Kenny replied. That boy's got something special, and I'm going to make sure he gets every opportunity to develop it. The showcase. The week leading up to the showcase passed in a blur of songwriting, rehearsing, and nervous anticipation. Daniel threw himself into his music with an intensity that impressed even Kenny, often practicing until well past midnight and rising before dawn to work on new material. You need to be careful not to burn yourself out, Kenny cautioned one morning after finding Daniel asleep over his guitar in the music room. I can't stop, Daniel said, rubbing his eyes. Every time I try to rest, I think about all the people who will be listening next week. What if I don't have enough good songs? What if they want to hear something I haven't written yet? Kenny sat down at the piano. Let me tell you about my first showcase. I was so nervous that I rewrote the same song 17 times in 3 days. By the time I performed it, I'd rehearsed all the life out of it. What happened? I bombed. Not because I wasn't prepared, but because I was over-prepared. I'd practiced until the music felt like work instead of joy. Daniel considered this. So what should I do? Trust the songs you've already written. Trust your voice. Trust the instincts that got you this far. Kenny played a few gentle chords. Music isn't about perfection, Daniel. It's about connection. The showcase was scheduled for Thursday evening at a small venue called The Listening Room, an intimate space known for hosting industry events. When Daniel and Kenny arrived, they found about 30 people scattered throughout the room, a mix of label executives, producers, managers, and other industry professionals. Sarah introduced Daniel with genuine enthusiasm, describing him as a young artist with an old soul and the kind of authentic voice that reminds us why we fell in love with music in the first place. Daniel took the small stage with his guitar, looking out at faces that held the power to shape his future. But as he began his first song, the one about taking chances, something magical happened. The nervousness that had plagued him all week melted away, replaced by the same natural confidence Kenny had witnessed at the gas station. He performed 5 songs, each one building on the last to create a narrative arc that told the story of his journey from small-town dreamer to Nashville hopeful. The audience was respectfully quiet during the performance, but Kenny could see heads nodding and phones coming out to record videos. When Daniel finished his final song, a haunting ballad about his grandmother that he'd written just days earlier, the applause was immediate and genuine. Several people approached him immediately after he left the stage, business cards in hand. That was remarkable, said a woman Kenny recognized as a prominent manager. I'd love to set up a meeting to discuss representation. A producer from one of the major labels pulled Daniel aside. We should talk about getting you into the studio. I've got some ideas for songs that would suit your voice perfectly. Sarah appeared at Kenny's elbow. I think we can safely say that went well. He was amazing up there, Kenny agreed. That's the performer I heard at the gas station, but with 2 weeks of Nashville confidence. Over the next hour, Daniel collected more business cards than he could count and scheduled enough meetings to fill the following 2 weeks. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when a grizzled songwriter in his 60s approached him near the end of the evening. Son, the man said, I've been writing songs in this town for 40 years, and I can count on one hand the number of times I've heard someone your age sing with that kind of depth. Don't let anybody change what makes you special. As they drove home, Daniel was quiet, processing everything that had happened. How do you feel? Kenny asked. Overwhelmed, grateful, scared. Daniel paused. Like everything I dreamed about is actually possible now. It is possible. But remember what Sarah said. This is just the beginning. The real work starts now. I know, and Mr. Rogers? Yes? Thank you for believing in me, for giving me this chance. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Kenny smiled. You'll repay me by becoming the artist you're meant to be, by staying true to yourself no matter how successful you become. And someday when you're established and you hear a young voice that stops you in your tracks, you'll give them the same chance I gave you. The contract. 3 weeks after the showcase, Daniel sat in a conference room at Monument Records, staring at a contract that would change his life forever. Sarah Chen sat beside him, along with the entertainment lawyer Kenny had recommended. Across the table sat the label's A&R director and their head of business affairs. It's a development deal, Sarah explained. They'll fund the recording of a 4-song EP, provide you with co-writing sessions with established songwriters, and if the EP performs well, they'll exercise their option for a full album. Daniel looked at the numbers on the contract. The advance wasn't huge, but it was more money than his family had ever seen at one time. What does this mean exactly? It means they believe in you enough to invest in your future, the A&R director, a woman named Jennifer Walsh, explained. We want to pair you with some of our best producers and help you develop your sound. But you'll still be you, Sarah added quickly. We're not looking to change your style or make you into something you're not. What we heard at the showcase was exactly what we want to capture. Kenny, who had been quietly observing the proceedings, spoke up. Daniel, take your time with this. Read every word, ask questions about anything you don't understand. The lawyer walked Daniel through each section of the contract, explaining the technical terms and making sure he understood his rights and obligations. It was a fair deal, especially for an unknown artist, but it represented a level of commitment that felt both thrilling and terrifying. I need to call my family, Daniel said finally. They should be part of this decision. Of course, Jennifer said. Take all the time you need. Daniel stepped outside to call Ray and his mother. Kenny could hear him through the conference room window, his voice animated as he explained the opportunity. When he returned, he was smiling. My mom cried, he said. Ray said to tell you that he's grateful for everything you've done. And what do you want to do? Kenny asked. Daniel looked at the contract again, then at the faces around the table, people who were offering to bet on his future. I want to sign it. I want to make music. The signing took 20 minutes. When Daniel's signature was finally on the last page, Jennifer stood up and shook his hand. Welcome to Monument Records, Daniel. We're excited to see what we can create together. As they left the building, Daniel was unusually quiet. They walked for several blocks before he spoke. It doesn't feel real yet, he said. It will, Kenny assured him. When you're in the studio next week, when you hear your songs being played back through professional speakers, it'll feel real then. I keep thinking about that night at the gas station. If you hadn't stopped, someone else would have discovered you eventually. Talent like yours doesn't stay hidden forever. Daniel shook his head. I don't think so. I think you were meant to be there that night. I think everything that happened was supposed to happen exactly the way it did. Kenny considered this. Maybe so. But what happens next is up to you. The recording session Monument's Studio A was a temple to music, a space where countless hits had been born and dreams had been transformed into reality. When Daniel walked in for his first recording session, he stopped in the doorway, overwhelmed by the history contained within these walls. This is where they recorded Heartbreak Hotel. The producer, a soft-spoken man named Tom Bradley, explained, and I Can't Stop Loving You. Some of the greatest voices in country music have stood exactly where you're standing. Daniel set his guitar case down reverently. It's incredible. Now it's your turn to add to that legacy, Tom said. Are you ready to make a record? They started with The Chance I Had to Take, the song Daniel had written about meeting Kenny. Tom had arranged for a small string section and a pedal steel guitar to accompany Daniel's vocals and acoustic guitar, creating a sound that was both contemporary and timeless. Just sing it like you sang it at the showcase, Tom instructed from the control room. Don't think about the microphones or the recording equipment. Think about the story you're telling. When Daniel began to sing, the studio fell silent except for his voice and the gentle accompaniment. Even the seasoned session musicians seemed moved by the emotional honesty in his performance. "That's a wrap on that one," Tom announced after the second take. "Daniel, that was beautiful. You've got a gift for making people feel what you're feeling." They recorded 3 more songs over the course of the week, each one capturing a different aspect of Daniel's artistry. The hymn that had impressed Sarah became an ethereal, almost spiritual experience with the addition of subtle orchestration. A new song about his grandmother's guitar was transformed into a celebration of musical heritage and family legacy. On the final day of recording, Kenny stopped by the studio to hear the progress. When Tom played back the rough mixes, Kenny felt the same chill he'd experienced at the gas station, the recognition of something special being born. "This is going to open doors for you," Kenny told Daniel as they listened to the playback. "These songs showcase everything that makes you unique as an artist." "It's better than I ever imagined it could be," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. "I keep thinking about Grandma Rose, wishing she could hear this." "She can hear it," Kenny said softly. Music has a way of reaching across time and space. Every time someone plays one of these songs, a part of her guitar's story continues. The EP was scheduled for release in 6 weeks, with a promotional plan that included radio interviews, streaming platform features, and a showcase tour of smaller venues throughout the Southeast. It was a modest but strategic rollout designed to build Daniel's audience gradually. "Remember," Sarah cautioned during a planning meeting, "this is a marathon, not a sprint. We're building a career, not just promoting a few songs." Daniel nodded, though Kenny could see the excitement and impatience warring in his expression. At 18, waiting 6 weeks for anything felt like an eternity. "Use this time to write," Kenny suggested, "and to really learn how this business works. Watch how Sarah and Jennifer handle the promotion, how Tom crafts sounds in the studio. Every day is a chance to learn something that will help you later." Daniel took this advice to heart, spending his days writing new songs and his evenings attending showcases and songwriter rounds, immersing himself in Nashville's music community. Kenny watched him grow more confident and sophisticated by the day, while somehow managing to retain the authenticity that had made him special in the first place. The release. The EP release party was held at the Bluebird Cafe, the legendary venue where so many country music careers had been launched. Daniel performed all 4 songs from the record, accompanied only by his guitar, in the intimate setting that had become synonymous with Nashville's songwriting tradition. The audience included industry professionals, local musicians, music journalists, and a small group of Daniel's family members who had driven up from Mississippi for the occasion. Ray and Linda sat in the front row, beaming with pride as their stepson performed for a room full of music industry insiders. "This is surreal," Linda whispered to Kenny during a break between songs. 6 months ago, he was singing for tips at a gas station. "And look at him now," Kenny replied, watching Daniel command the small stage with growing confidence. "He belongs here." The performance went flawlessly, with each song receiving enthusiastic applause. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when Daniel introduced his final song. "This last one is called Rose's Guitar," he said, holding up the battered acoustic that had started everything. "It's about my grandmother, who taught me that music isn't about fame or money. It's about keeping love alive even after the people we love are gone." As Daniel sang about his grandmother's dreams and the guitar that carried them forward, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. When he finished, the applause was long and heartfelt, the kind of response that told everyone present they had witnessed something special. After the show, radio programmers and playlist curators approached Daniel with enthusiasm. Several regional stations committed to adding "The Chance I Had to Take" to their regular rotation, and streaming services expressed interest in featuring the EP on their new country playlists. "This is exactly the kind of response we were hoping for," Jennifer told Kenny as they watched Daniel accept congratulations from the crowd. Authentic enthusiasm from the people who can actually help his career. Over the following weeks, the EP began to gain traction. Radio stations in smaller markets started playing Daniel's songs, and streaming numbers showed steady growth. Music blogs wrote favorable reviews, praising Daniel's refreshing authenticity and mature songwriting that belies his young age. But perhaps the most gratifying response came from listeners themselves. Social media filled with posts from people who had been moved by Daniel's music, sharing their own stories of taking chances and following dreams. "Look at this," Daniel said one morning, showing Kenny his phone. A woman in Arkansas wrote that she heard Rose's guitar on the radio and called her own grandmother for the first time in years. Kenny smiled. "That's what it's all about. That's why we make music, to help people connect with what matters most." 3 months after the EP's release, Monument Records exercised their option for a full album. Daniel had proven himself not just as a performer, but as a songwriter capable of creating music that resonated with audiences beyond Nashville's city limits. "We want to start working on the album next month," Jennifer announced during a meeting at the label offices. Same team, bigger budget, and the opportunity to really showcase Daniel's range as an artist. Daniel looked at Kenny. "What do you think?" "I think you're ready," Kenny said. "You've learned the business, you've proven yourself professionally, and most importantly, you haven't lost what made you special in the first place." The full circle. 1 year after Kenny Rogers had pulled into that gas station in Mississippi, he stood in the wings of the Grand Ole Opry, watching Daniel Carter perform for a sold-out crowd of music lovers from around the world. Daniel's debut album had exceeded everyone's expectations, producing 3 hit singles and establishing him as one of country music's most promising new voices. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel said into the microphone, "I want to tell you about a man who changed my life. A year ago, I was singing for tips at a gas station, just trying to make enough money for my next meal. Then a stranger heard my music and believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." Kenny felt his throat tighten as Daniel gestured toward the wings. "Mr. Kenny Rogers, would you please join me on stage?" The crowd erupted as Kenny walked out, embracing Daniel before taking his place at the second microphone. They had performed together many times over the past year, but doing so at the Opry felt like a benediction. "This young man," Kenny told the audience, "reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. He taught me that the best songs aren't the ones that make you famous. They're the ones that make you remember who you are." They performed "The Chance I Had to Take" together, their voices blending in harmony that spoke of friendship, mentorship, and the mysterious ways that music brings people together. When they finished, the standing ovation lasted for several minutes. Backstage afterward, Kenny found a quiet moment with Daniel. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Not just for your success, but for how you've handled it. You've stayed true to yourself." "I had a good teacher," Daniel replied, "and I had someone who believed in me before I had any reason to believe in myself." Kenny thought about that night at the gas station, about the series of small decisions that had led to this moment. If he had driven straight through Mississippi, if he had stopped at a different gas station, if Daniel had chosen a different evening to sing, any of those changes would have meant this conversation never happened. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Kenny asked. Daniel nodded. "Every day. But I've decided that wondering about what might have been is less important than being grateful for what is. That's wisdom that took me decades to learn. I had good teachers for that too," Daniel said, smiling. 6 months later, Kenny attended Daniel's wedding to a fellow songwriter he had met in Nashville. Ray and Linda were there, glowing with pride as they watched their stepson marry for love in a small ceremony surrounded by the Nashville music community that had embraced him. "He's grown up so much," Linda observed as she and Kenny watched Daniel dance with his new wife. "Success has a way of doing that," Kenny replied. "But the important thing is, he's grown up without growing away from who he is at heart." As the evening wore on, Kenny found himself thinking about the nature of legacy. He had spent decades creating music that would outlive him, but perhaps his most important contribution to the world was standing on that dance floor, guitar calluses on his fingers and joy in his eyes. The next morning, Kenny received a package at his house. Inside was a framed photograph of Daniel performing at the Opry, along with a handwritten note. "Dear Kenny, my grandmother used to say that music was like a river. It had to keep flowing or it would dry up. Thank you for helping my music flow to places I never dreamed it could go. But more than that, thank you for showing me that kindness is the most beautiful song anyone can sing. Your friend always, Daniel." Attached to the note was a newspaper clipping, a small item from a Mississippi paper about a local scholarship fund that Daniel had established for young musicians who couldn't afford instruments or lessons. The fund was named the Rose Carter Memorial Music Program, honoring the grandmother who had given him his first guitar. Kenny smiled as he read the article. This was how it was supposed to work. Talent and kindness flowing forward like a river, reaching new shores and nurturing new dreams. He walked out to his porch and sat down with his own guitar, playing softly in the morning sunshine. Somewhere in Nashville, Daniel was probably doing the same thing, and somewhere else, another young person was discovering that they had a voice worth sharing with the world. The circle was complete, but it was also just beginning. The legacy continues. 5 years after that fateful evening at the Mississippi gas station, the ripple effects of Kenny Rogers' decision to stop and listen continued to spread in ways neither he nor Daniel could have anticipated. Daniel Carter had become one of country music's most respected young artists, with 3 successful albums and a reputation for discovering and mentoring emerging talent. His annual Gas Station Sessions showcase had become a must-attend event for Nashville industry insiders, featuring unknown artists performing in the same intimate setting where stars were born. But perhaps more importantly, the story of how a country music legend discovered a singing teenager had become part of Nashville mythology, inspiring countless musicians to keep believing in their dreams even when success seemed impossible. Kenny, now in his late 70s, had officially retired from touring, but remained active as a mentor and advisor to young artists. His collaboration with Daniel on several songs had introduced his music to a new generation of fans, while Daniel's success had validated Kenny's belief that authentic voices would always find their audience. The gas station in Mississippi had become an unlikely pilgrimage site for aspiring musicians, many of whom would stop to sing where Daniel had been discovered. The station's owner, recognizing an opportunity, had installed a small stage and began hosting weekly Rising Star Nights, giving other young artists the chance to be heard. Ray Morrison had left construction to become Daniel's tour manager, finding new purpose in helping facilitate the career he had once tried to discourage. Linda Carter worked part-time for Daniel's fan club, answering letters from young musicians who wrote asking for advice and encouragement. But the most meaningful legacy was perhaps the hardest to measure: the number of people who had been inspired by Daniel's story to take chances on their own dreams, to treat others with kindness, and to remember that sometimes the most important moments in life happen when we least expect them. On quiet evenings, when Kenny sat on his porch playing guitar, he would sometimes hear the distant sound of young voices practicing in garages and bedroom studios throughout Nashville. Each one represented someone who believed their song was worth singing, someone who trusted that the right listener would hear them when the time was right. And sometimes, if the wind was just right and the evening was particularly still, those voices would blend together into a choir of hope that reminded Kenny why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. Not for the fame or the awards or the recognition, but for the simple, profound joy of helping human hearts connect across the spaces between them. The gas station still stood on Highway 82, its neon sign flickering in the darkness, waiting for the next traveler who might need more than just fuel for their journey. And somewhere in the night, a young voice was singing, trusting that someone would stop to listen. Because the best songs are the ones that remind us we're not alone, and the best journeys are the ones where we stop to hear them.